Penn State fans, Bob Flounders here with the one and only Johnny McGonigal. It's time for a little blue-white breakdown. It's Tuesday, a little before 4 p.m. Tuesday. I just got back from State College listening to James Franklin's Tuesday presser prior to the big Iowa game, Saturday night at Beaver Stadium, 7:30 on CBS. James said it's the first time since 1990 that CBS has been at Beaver Stadium. So that was interesting to me, but maybe not to you. Johnny McGonigal is with me as always. Johnny, pretty interesting press conference today. I don't know about you. I thought James was in a much better mood maybe than he was at the end after the Illinois game and that presser. I didn't think he was maybe the happiest camper in the world, but I might have read it wrong, Johnny. How are you doing?
No, I read it the same way you did, Bob. Definitely seemed a little bit more chipper today. You could probably tell you were in State College for the presser. I was watching, over Zoom, getting a question in and all that.
Yep.
You could probably feel the energy a little bit more in the room. But no, I'm doing well and very much looking forward to this Whiteout game this weekend. Penn-State-Iowa, a ranked matchup. First ranked matchup of the season for Penn State. It might be only one of three, with Michigan and Ohio State still to come. So a big weekend for the Nittany Lions, big opportunity for Drew Aller, for this entire team that, we talked after the game and Champaign, lovely Champaign, Bob, that they had some work to do, that they had some things to correct on film. And, they've done that on Sunday, Monday, and now they're getting ready for the Hawkeyes.
Yeah, big game for Penn State. Still holding at number 7 in the rankings. We'll get to you and where you had him on your ballot. Iowa, the mighty Iowa offense and the Hawkeyes. Number 24, Kirk Ferentz, his OC son Brian Ferentz are coming to town. Last time they were here, I think it was the COVID year. They won that game, but it was just one of those. It was one of those deals where Penn State started that COVID year just terribly. They were terribly off. Lost their 5 games. I was one of them, but we're not going to talk about that, Johnny. I'm wearing my Cowboys hat, Johnny, and the only reason I did it today is for a perfect segue. Or could be 2 reasons. One, they're 2-0 and they're looking pretty good, as are your 2-0 Eagles. But James was asked about Micha Parsons, who is, just off to a terrific start in Dallas for that defense. And just kind of, there's a lot of people starting to warm to the idea of him being maybe the best player, not just the best defensive player in football. If he's not the best player, I could buy that. But he's on a very short list, and he's a very, very motivated guy. But James was asked about him and kind of any thoughts, just not only about that, but also just about, and James reflected on Micah's time at Penn State. I know you were able to write something about that, but he really he dug deep for that answer. He went in a couple different directions. I thought it was interesting, but my favorite part was when he said, because it's a little revealing about James. He loves the fact that Micah is frugal on social media, which is another word. You could say cheap, but frugal probably sounds a little bit better. I know what he was getting at. I think you do too. But just your thoughts on what he had to say about Micah.
Yeah, Bob, it was a lot. It was a long answer. It made it an easy story to write because it's like, hey, here's everything he said. Go ahead and take a crack and read it. But obviously a lot of really good things, anyone's able to say about Micah as a football player.
Yeah.
But James, in his long, lengthy answer, did not, commend Micah for his pass rush moves or his tackles for loss or his quarterback pressures. It was more so about the person, Micha Parsons, and how he's developed off the field and how he developed from the 9th grader that they started recruiting to a kid. He mentioned the roller coaster recruiting ride yet again, something that James has mentioned in the past. Mentioned that they had to have some tough love with him when he was on campus. The 2 seasons that he played at Penn State. He mentioned right off the bat that he wishes that they had him for a 3rd season because Micah opted out when really it was when the Big Ten canceled the football season, and then they decided to reinstitute it. But Micah's decision was made by then. But he talked about how Micah had sent him and Brent Pry recently a heartfelt message and has really appreciated in retrospect the community aspect of Penn State and everything that kind of goes on and around being a football player at Penn State. And so it was a really interesting answer during a press conference, Bob, that there was a lot of like big picture thoughts and questions thrown
Love it,
around.
love it when he gets those questions. He loves it too because he could talk for a really, really long time, and then he only gets to face like 7 or 8 questions for the press conference. But yeah, there were a lot of long, big picture questions and big picture answers.
He even mentioned that. James even said, like, hey, this feels like this press conference is going long. And he even mentioned, yeah, normally when I have long answers, that cuts down on the questions I have to get. It's definitely a strategy. It's absolutely a strategy on his part. But no, he's really proud of the player and the person Micha Parsons has turned into. And it's hard not to be impressed with him as a football player. The performances that he's had, obviously in his career so far, but over the last couple of weeks and against the Jets over the weekend, has it's early for MVP talk, just across the league, but you're starting to see some opinions float out there, like, hey, if a defensive player is going to win MVP, maybe it's going to be Micha Parsons. Could be that kind of guy. So we'll see. We'll stay tuned on that. But in the meantime, James Franklin really proud of what Micha Parsons has become and what he's still yet to do.
Yeah, and for me, it was really, really a privilege to get to cover him at Penn State, watch him grow in a new position, really. He was a defensive end at Harrisburg High and before that at Central Dauphin, and they asked him to learn, the Penn State way as a linebacker, and that's a big adjustment, we not really having that background. There's a lot that goes into that fundamental wise. You can't maybe be as aggressive as a linebacker as you are as a defensive end. So it did take him a little while to just kind of get comfortable. But, by the time he left Penn State, everyone wants to remember that Cotton Bowl, but he had kind of figured things out, and you were starting to see that elite speed and strength come into play. It was really a pleasure covering him. Not only that, talking to him. He was always a really, really good interview. As a Cowboys fan, I couldn't be happier. But just so that anyone doesn't get the wrong idea. So I was kidding about cheap. So James mentioned, and I thought it was interesting, James liked the fact that he was frugal. But what he was trying to say is, Micah Micah is kind of a big picture guy in a way because he's cautious with his money. I guess he's been on social media maybe wondering about the price of a haircut, stuff like that. But he's a guy that's made a lot of money. But he also knows that if he can just kind of pace yourself when you're making all this money, you're going to be in a great position kind of for the rest of your life. And James kind of credited him for being that way at a young age. And I think he hopes maybe some Penn State players, now that there's some NIL, Johnny, might take Micah's lead. So that's what he meant about Micah being frugal. He also did mention that Micah was maybe the biggest fan of the Penn State wrestling program and K.L. Sanderson. He was at all the big matches, probably all the matches we could get to. But yeah, it was nice to see him, Johnny, talk at length about Micha Parsons, and we'll just see how this season unfolds. For Micah, just a couple of notes before we get into the Iowa nitty gritty. Hey, Penn State fans, we are going to take some of our text subscriber questions. We asked for them before this podcast. We have a couple we're going to get to, and I think it's a great deal. I mean, we really want you guys to consider maybe becoming part of the text subscriber Penn State fan base. It's growing every week. We have a good group, and you get some access to myself, Johnny McGonigal, David Jones. So we highly recommend it if you guys are interested. The number to call for more information, 717-912-9969. So that's the number you can call. We hope you do it. We're going to get to some questions, Johnny, in a bit. 2 interesting things I thought about James. At the start he always has got like an intro. And at the start of that, he did mention, number 1, Trace McSorley and Grant Haley are back in town, and they're going to be honorary captains for the Penn State-Iowa game. 7:30 kick on CBS. It's going to be the Whiteout game. The atmosphere is going to be electric for sure. But they were in the weight room working out as he was doing the press conference. I think both of them still have designs on continuing their NFL careers. The other thing was there was some question as to how many whiteouts there have been at the start of the press conference. I think in the official release, the number was 15, and there was some, and Audrey Snyder of The Athletic, James said one number, Audrey said another. Greg Kincaid maybe admitted, I think, that it was wrong in the release, and then they came back and said actually total whiteouts might be 19, but they weren't full whiteouts. But James and looked at Greg, and there was kind of a wager. They both had to do some push-ups because of the fact that the whiteout number may be wrong. I'm still not sure what number they're going to go by. All I know is I think I've seen all of them. It's a fascinating experience, Johnny, and it's going to be tough for Iowa really to get settled in just because of the atmosphere, number one, because of the Penn State defense, number two. And this is a game, Penn State's, as we talk about it, a 14.5-point favorite. You don't usually see the total is 40. And I know that Iowa has struggled to score, but you rarely see a Penn State total at home that low. And James said it. He said, it's good. This game's good. We're going to have to grind it out against this team. So I do expect a low-scoring game. And Iowa also has a very good punter, so field position will be critical. But low scoring might exactly fit what Penn State's doing right now because there were some warts, I think, that were exposed. I shouldn't say warts, maybe some minor concerns coming out of the Illinois game about specifically about their offense. The defense played great. I don't know how big those concerns really are, Johnny. I think what you saw was Illinois had started shaky. Big Ten play at home. They're playing a ranked team, Penn State. They had beaten them 2 years ago. They weren't afraid of them. And so their best players brought their A game, and a lot of their best players were on the front seven. And it really was some heavy lifting for Penn State's offense, even with the defensive help, all those takeaways to kind of get some separation.
Yeah, Bob. No, it's it was interesting over Zoom to see James Franklin kind of disappear from the it's not the podium. What do you call it? A dais? I don't know.
Yeah, I think a dais maybe more than a podium. He's sitting down. He's got Greg Kincaid, who is the football SID. To James's right, the media's left. If you're looking at it through the Zoom call, Greg kind of handles the press conference, calls on some people on Zoom, and then directs the microphones in the media room once they go off Zoom to people who have questions. But yeah, at one point you couldn't see either one of them because they were behind. They were actually on the ground. You couldn't see them. They were doing penalty push-ups.
Yeah, so that was interesting. I think this is going to be. I think the point of contention was student whiteout or full stadium whiteout.
Full whiteout, correct.
Yeah, I think this is going to be the 15th full whiteout, and I believe they're 8-6 in those games.
Yeah.
And of course, in years past, it's been the toughest game. It's been Ohio State and Michigan for the most part. Last year Minnesota, this year Iowa.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of that has to do with the Fox Big Noon kickoff, and those Michigan Ohio State games being at noon and not wanting to have a whiteout at noon. But this is going to be an interesting game. And what I asked James today, I thought was interesting coming off the Illinois game where the entire offense just didn't look sharp, and Harrison Wallace III being out, I think had something to do with that. Jerzon Newton, the star defensive tackle for Illinois, disrupting everything, had a lot to do with that as well. But, we saw Drew cruise, week one against West Virginia, 325 yards passing, 3 tutties, no interception. He did what he needed to do against Delaware, but he and the offense as a whole was kind of off. And I asked James, I said, look, this is his first whiteout start. And he had experience last year getting in for a couple drives in that game against Minnesota. Yeah. He played in front of a big crowd in West Virginia, but how do you think he might handle you in terms of handling that pressure that comes along with playing in an atmosphere like the whiteout? And James kind of leaned on something that he said about Nick Singleton and Katron Allen last year when they had played, a lot of ball by mid-season or so, and he said that, hey, these guys aren't freshmen anymore. He said that Drew, we're kind of done with the firsts now. He already had his first start. He already had his first road start. He had his first helmet stripe out start. He kind of mixes in a joke in there, but I think that the tenor around Drew, it's like he's not a kid anymore, at least in the building within the coaching staff, is that he's already seen enough through 3 games that they trust him to handle himself the right way and to direct this offense the way it needs to be directed. And it's going to be a challenge though to do that against an Iowa defense that has one of the best defensive backs in college football, in Cooper DeJean, who is run by a coordinator, Phil Parker, who's been doing it for a long time in the Big Ten. And Iowa is typically a stingy defense. And you mentioned what the over-under total is, and I think that's indicative of that. But I'm going to be interested to see just how Drew handles himself in this game and how the offense as a whole handles itself. And I wouldn't be surprised if they have a bit of a bounce-back performance. But James also mentioned later in his press conference, this could be a game where you have to grind it out again because they had to grind it out against Illinois. So I guess we'll see what kind of game script and what kind of game flow we get on a Saturday night.
Yeah. It's a little surprising to me. I got back to Harrisburg early afternoon on Sunday. I was out a little bit enjoying the NFL games. And you and I watched the game. It wasn't obviously, Drew, I think, had come into that game. He faced 2 not very, I don't think athletic or particularly talented defenses at home in his first 2 games. He's completing almost 80% of his passes, and that was on the road against an Illinois team that Brett Bielema kind of is. He knows what he's doing. I know they were struggling, but you knew that they were going to be a little bit more fired up for this game. Big noon kickoff, all that stuff. I don't think Drew played poorly. There were 4 or 5 drops. He did miss some throws for sure. They weren't particularly great in the red zone. They had to settle for some short field goals. But there were a lot. I talked to some people, and they were like, "What was the deal with Drew? I just think that they got so spoiled by those first 2 efforts against teams that just I don't think defensively can't cause you many problems. That the reality is this kid's making his 4th career start, and it was tough on the road. And also, Johnny, I just think that not having Harrison Wallace, Trey Wallace in that game certainly helped Illinois. They could kind of do some things to really make sure Keandre Lambert-Smith didn't frolic for 8 or 10 catches. He was open, I think, for a touchdown in the end zone, and I don't think Drew saw him. I think he had 3 catches for 23, 25 yards, but I don't know that it was all on Drew. I think the offensive line, they got a good test, right? They know that they're not the 94 offensive line. They have some talented players, but they're going to have to keep working at it. The penalties were a problem, Johnny, especially dead ball fouls, one on defense, one on offense. I think Drew did just fine. I really think that field goal drive right before the first half was significant. He made a big-time throw to Liam Clifford. And then in the second half, their depth just took over in that game. One thing I wanted to ask you, where are you with Nicholas Singleton's development as a runner? He was effective as a receiver. If you look at the 3 games, I mean, he's got some touchdowns, but Katron's been the most consistent back through 3 games. James tried to dress that up as saying, hey, they're trying to take those guys away, make Drew beat them. There's some truth to that, but I just think that Nick has come close, but I still think we haven't seen the best of him yet this year, and I do think Katron does some things better, in a tight box maybe than Nick does.
Yeah, I agree. We definitely haven't seen the best of Nick Singleton this year. I mean, I think he has 154 yards through 3 games, 37 yards at Illinois. And talking to him after the game, he had that 16-yard touchdown run where he got a crease and he hit it. I mean, he just accelerated through the second level and went in the end zone. And kind of similar to Katron scoring against Delaware, Nick against Illinois just had this kind of pouring of emotion, was really, I mean, obviously everyone's excited when they score a touchdown, but it felt like it had been pent up, like he was waiting for a play like that. That 16-yard run is his longest run of the season. This is a guy who this time last year, he's coming off the Ohio game where he had 179 yards. He's coming off the Auburn game, which kind of introduced him to the country. To those who may not have known who Nick Singleton is, he had 2 50-yard runs in that game. And so he's been bottled up through 3 games. I asked him if he feels like it's just a matter of time, before he pops one, before one goes the distance. And he said he's just going to keep plugging away and he's going to stay patient. But the way that especially Illinois, without Harrison Wallace in the lineup, was playing them this past weekend, just loading the box, press man coverage, and make a wide receiver room and a pass catching group as a whole. That's without arguably their second best player in that group. Make those guys beat you. And like you mentioned, Keandre did have an open touchdown. I believe it was the first play of the second quarter that Drew missed. But when a defense, especially with 2 really good defensive tackles like that in Randolph and Newton, are just loading the box against you, I think it lends more to a Katron Allen type of runner than maybe Nick. But I do think Nick is making strides. It just takes him a little bit to get going. Like it takes him just a touch to get going. Whereas, Katron with his power and his shiftiness, really, even if he gets hit at the line of scrimmage, he might lower his shoulder and barrel over for 3 or 4 yards. But I do think it's just a matter of time before we see the Nick Singleton that we saw last season. It might not be this weekend against Iowa, but if it is, I mean, what an occasion that would be to see the reemergence of Nick Singleton, the way that we know that the player that we know, to do it on a big stage on CBS, national TV, Whiteout, all that. If he's able to break a big one, that the press box is going to be shaken, Bob.
Yeah. I think one of the funny things to me is the perception of Katron and the perception of Nick. I just, having watched them play now this year too, and how they did it last year. You mentioned Nick's touchdown run for 16 yards. He saw the crease. There was a hole there. He hit it. He accelerated. North-south, right? To me, that is the best version of Nick. Not that he can't obviously, not that he can't run outside, but it just takes him. I just think when he is going north-south and there is a lane there, he's going to be tough. East-west, I think he's still a work in progress. But the irony is, I think Katron is obviously very good north-south, but he's actually deceptively good east-west, even though Nick is the faster player. There's things you do on the football field, and there's a way, I think, to do that. Katron, and not that Katron's not slow, but he's just not as fast as Nick. It just seems like maybe that Katron can do a little bit of both at this stage, and Nick is just elite home run hitter, just straight up the middle, north-south. We'll see if he can kind of develop the east-west game a little bit more, but I think I've just seen him too many times look like he's trying to turn the corner and somebody either runs him down or he just can't shake free. So we'll see if that changes. But I just think that Katron's a little shiftier than people give him credit. And I think Nick is actually really, really good north-south. He just hasn't had maybe some clear sailing. But if he does get in the open, Johnny, you're not going to catch him, as we saw in the Rose Bowl, as we saw a couple times early last year. He's a fantastic back. He's due. He might be overdue. I just hope he doesn't press. So why don't we do this, Johnny? We're about 23 minutes into this. Why don't I get to some of the questions that some of our tech subscribers asked prior to this podcast? You're welcome to take a crack at these. I'm going to pick a couple of them. I'm just going to say there's one that says generally, will Drew Aller improve this week? I think we've already talked a little bit about that. So let's get to these 2 questions. You ready? This is for you. All Maybe right. You guys can talk about the similarities with this Iowa team versus the traditional Iowa teams. And let me get to versus the traditional Iowa teams and what's different this year. I know they tried to correct their bad offense last year in the offseason. However, I believe PSU has the significant athletic advantage in all phases. We might as well get to it, Johnny, before you answer the question. the OC at Iowa is the son of Kirk Ferentz. Brian Ferentz is his name. He is definitely on the hot seat. They actually have a number tied to points scored this year for him to continue coaching in 2024. But what are your thoughts on maybe this comparing this Iowa team to traditional Iowa teams, and if there really is anything different this year?
You mentioned Brian Ferentz, Bob. With a mailbag earlier this week,
Yeah.
I referred to him as the poster boy for nepotism in college football, and I don't think that's like an outlandish statement to make either. Like, he's the offensive coordinator at Iowa because his dad is the head coach, and the fact that they had to put in that contractual stipulation or obligation for Iowa to average, I believe it's 25 points per game
Correct.
this season and win 7 games.
Mm-hmm.
It was honestly it was funny last week. We're driving back from Champaign to our hotel outside O'Hare Airport to fly out Sunday morning, and I'm in the back seat. Joe Hermit's driving. You're sitting, passenger. I'm in the back watching on my phone the Iowa Western Michigan game.
Do you have anything on that by any chance, Johnny?
I may or may not have had a couple shekels on Western Michigan to cover 28.5.
Okay.
Either way.
You can't leave it out. You can't leave that part out.
No, you can't. That's why I was watching the game. But Iowa's pressing to score a touchdown in the closing seconds, basically to just keep padding Brian Ferentz's stats. And it's like, what are we doing here? Either way, in terms of the actual question that's at hand, in terms of, is this Iowa offense different? I think the biggest difference is Cade McNamara at quarterback. He's better than Spencer Petras. That's for damn sure. Spencer Petras was one of the worst quarterbacks I've seen in college football. So Cade McNamara is better than him, but in terms of, there's a lot of similarities in how they play, though. They still like to grind it out. They still rely on the tight ends, which is a problem for them now because Luke Lachey, who is one of the best tight ends in college football, if not the best. I mean, Brock Bowers at Georgia would like a word, I guess. But Luke Lachey, really good tight end. He's probably out for the year after, I believe it was a broken leg that he suffered last week. So they'll be relying a lot on Eric All, who Penn State fans will remember was a tight end at Michigan, caught a drag route a couple years ago at Beaver Stadium that ended up winning the game for Michigan against Penn State in a tight game. I think that was like 21-17.
You got it.
But yeah, so they're pretty similar in terms of the schematics of it. Brian Ferentz hasn't changed much, but I do think McNamara brings a little bit of a different edge to the offense, and that he can actually run and not look like he has cementing issues.
Yeah, the Lachey injury, I'm glad you brought it up. That is significant. That was his favorite target, and with good reason. Now they don't have him. I was looking at the running game stats. Now look, you could make the argument they were holding something back for Penn State. I don't buy it. They beat Utah State. They beat Iowa State, who then turned around and lost 10-7 to Ohio, not Ohio State, the Ohio Bobcats. And then they got the better of a Western Michigan team that just simply the game went on and they got out athleted and they got out physical, and they did run it up a little bit late, and that's probably why they did it to keep Brian Ferentz on the good side. I think they have 85 points now, so they're if you're averaging 25 a game, they're plus 10 right now, even though one of those touchdowns was a defensive touchdown, but they're going to count it. That's another story. I think this is absolutely like a clone of if you just think, if you're an older Penn State fan, even if you're in your 20s or 30s, and you think of the 2019 Penn State Iowa game that they won 17-12, or you think of the 21-19 game they won on the last play in 2017 out there, and you just think of a lot of Penn State Iowa games. I mean, this is kind of what this Iowa team is. They might even be less dynamic on offense without Lachey, and the quarterback, as you said. It's easy to you know what Penn State's defense knows where to find him on Saturday night, exactly where he's going to be. I don't think he's much of a threat to do anything but either hand off or throw short passes. So this is the standard Iowa offense. I don't think there's going to be any surprises. and that's not a great sign for Iowa going into this game. They do have some very good defensive players. They have maybe the best punter in the nation, and if you think that's not a big deal, you wonder why you wonder why the total is 40. Unless something weird happens, Penn State's offense is going to have to go 85 yards, 90 yards with this guy, the way this guy kicks the ball. And against that Iowa defense, it's going to be hard to do. Johnny, let's do one more question real quick before we wrap up the blue-white breakdown. This is kind of an interesting one to me, and I think you could dig into. Why is there not more emphasis on developing Bo Prabula's passing skills when he comes in the game? If all he does is run, he will never be prepared if Drew Aller gets injured and Bo ascends to the QB1 spot.
Yeah, look, it's tough because I'm sure Penn State would have loved to be in a position where they were up a lot more last week at Illinois and get him some more run. He did get in the game. I don't know. I think a part of it is not wanting to run up the score on some teams, but I think we've seen a decent bit of Bo already this season. He's played, in all 3 games, and I would expect to see him maybe not in the Iowa game if it's as tight as we think it might be, but it is a 14-point spread, just like Illinois was last week. So if Penn State's up by 3 scores, if they're up by 17 or 20, in the fourth quarter, they'll have no problem getting Bo in the game. I think with Bo, the bigger question is are they going to use him in weird packages or exotic packages? Because that was something that was hinted at in the offseason by James Franklin on more than one occasion.
Yeah.
You would like him to be a little bit more polished as a passer if you're going to put him out there in, legitimate, meaningful snaps if you decide to use him. So it's not just, hey, he's going to go quarterback draw every single time. And good luck stopping this bigger version of Trace McSorley who's going to try and run you over. But I think Bo has more to him than that. It's just a matter of developing him and playing him, but at the same time too, you want to have Drew get as many meaningful snaps as possible because again, he's still now only a 3-time starter, and so in terms of pushing the ball downfield and you want to make sure he gets the reps that he needs, and then also another part of this is when Bo comes on, is he working with the ones or is he working with the 3rd string wide receivers or the 3rd string Khalil Dinkins at tight end, Caden Saunders, some of these underproven players who, they already have issues at wide receiver in terms of guys really stepping up. And so do you want to put Bo in a situation where he might throw a pick or he might get on the wrong page with one of these guys? So I think there's a lot that goes into it. I do think maybe we'll see him throw a little bit more in the Northwestern game because Penn State should be up big in that. And as well as the UMass game, just in case Drew goes down, that Bo is ready for an Ohio State or a Michigan if he has to be. I think there's a lot that goes into that, equation.
Yeah, just one thought on what you just said. I agree with everything, Johnny. I think fans have to also know this. Drew and Bo are 2 really different quarterbacks. Drew has played his whole life, high school, whatever it is, trying to get rid of the ball. Certainly he can run the ball. He ran the ball against Illinois, but he's gotten really good at staying in the pocket, using his mobility. He does have some for a big kid to extend the play to throw the ball. I think, Bo, when he was at Central York, I think a lot of his life, he's just used to first sign of trouble. I'm an athlete. I'm going to take off. I'm going to run the ball. I think there's some of that to him. They're 2 different quarterbacks. I know that Bo can throw the ball, but I think he's so young and he almost has to unlearn a little bit the instinct, when the pocket's not clean. Do I try and just put my head down and try and make 5 or 6 yards, or do I just try to extend the play, stay in the pocket, throw the ball downfield? I think there's some of that at work too, but it is really hard when he gets into games to kind of throw the ball the way that they're throwing it with Drew. They're just not the same quarterback, and if anything would happen to Drew, they're going to have to tinker with that offense. There's no way I think you can run the offense they run with Drew. James has said that they're different kinds of quarterbacks, and I think the throwing part for Bo will come. But in an emergency situation where Drew gets hurt, and Drew's the guy that's gotten all the reps and he's played all the significant snaps, I think the expectation that he's just going to be able to throw the ball, somewhat like Drew, and be the starting quarterback, that's just going to come over time, I think.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. It's they're two different guys and like I mentioned too, Drew is throwing to Keandre and, not so much Theo Johnson and Tyler Warren necessarily, because the tight end position, I don't want to say ignored. That's too harsh a word, but I'm actually writing about Theo Johnson for Wednesday morning and his lack of involvement in the passing game. So PennLive readers and listeners, go take a look at that when that comes out. But I just think they're working with different personnel right now. They're working with pretty much a different playbook, or at least they're playing to Mike Yurcich is playing to each quarterback's strengths when they're in the game. And like you said, Bob, if something happens to Drew, I think the plays, and everything that they decide to run and how they operate that offense changes pretty drastically with Bo in there. Again, not saying he can't throw the ball, because obviously he can. But it's he's a different quarterback than Drew. So let's hope for Penn State's sake that Drew stays healthy throughout the season, and that's not an issue, right? That maybe that starting quarterback can stay healthy against Iowa, unlike a couple years ago when Sean unfortunately went down and Roberson had to fill in, and the game kind of fell apart at that point. Let's knock on wood that everyone on the field stays healthy, Bob. That we just have a good, clean game, and looking forward to hearing how many boos there are pregame for Iowa, because there's going to be a lot.
Yeah. Hey, Johnny, we're going to wrap it up now. I'm looking at the time for this podcast. It's about 36 minutes. I think James's press conference also about 36 minutes, so we matched him, and I think that was not necessarily a goal of ours. We still did it. You guys, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. I'll be on with Dave Jones a little later in the week on Blue White Breakdown. Johnny and Dustin will have one as well. I think towards the end of the week. We're not done with the podcast. We're not done with the Penn State coverage. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching, and we'll have more stuff on Penn State, Iowa as the week unfolds.